Trustees, President, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight, and I consider it a great honor to, I'm going to go ahead and bring this up here. I consider it a great honor to be here as we not only debate, we talk about what's really going on. So, our nation, from its beginning, was not set up as a freedom from religion nation, but rather a freedom of religion nation. My point tonight is to bring out the moral and historical arguments for you to consider. The moral and ethical underpinnings of our legal and historical footings can be traced back to our Judeo-Christian heritage. Woven throughout all the fundamental principles and values that our founding fathers believed, wrote about, and etched in stone for a legacy to be carried forward. The Bible in general and the Ten Commandments in specific are from what the founders of the United States continuously use to be a guiding light for future generations. To simply deny the overall evidence is to willfully ignore the founding fathers' intentional and historic effort and repeated use of scriptures, acknowledgement of God, and of a plethora of biblical quotations etched in federal buildings along with religious symbols across this great land which echo their historic undertaking. Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments, not the 10 suggestions. There are Bible verses etched in stone all over the federal buildings and monuments in Washington, D.C. I know that because I was born and raised there. I grew up on those monuments, and when I grew up on those monuments, I didn't know what a lot of those things meant. I just knew that they were etched in stone, and it was only when I got older that I began to understand the real significance of what our founding fathers were trying to tell us, were trying to show us, and was trying to remind us. If you go to the Supreme Court, and I'm not going to get too far into this, but if you go to the Supreme Court, what you're going to see, the front entrance of the western side is a sculpture intended to be a symbolic representation of 3 Eastern civilizations from which our laws were devised. And you see this, and they have leaders on both sides, and that right there is considered to be Moses. He's the one right in the center holding the tablets. So our law is generally based on the moral law, the Ten Commandments, but there are other influences that have affected our law as well. And if you go to the Supreme Court inside, there are literally over 50 symbols of the Ten Commandments in the Supreme Court that are there today. I would challenge you to go to Washington and see that for yourself. When you go to the House, you'll see this, 23 marble relief portraits over the gallery doors of the House chambers in a U.S. Capitol. And they're all historical figures as well, but you'll notice on the left side there are 11 figures, and on the right side there are 11 figures. They're all facing, Moses is in the center, and he's circled right there. He's the only one full-face view. So they were telling us in a very subtle way that, yeah, there are influences from other people in our history, but Moses is central. And we know Moses is a lawgiver, and where he got the 10 Commandments from was from God. So, what's that? Okay. If you were in the House, you would see this, "In God We Trust." The history of "In God We Trust" on the U.S. coins goes back to the Civil War, which occurred in the first half of the 1860s. Supporters of the Union wanted to help boost morale, so what they did was they put "In God We Trust" on the coins. The motto was first appeared in our nation's 2 cents on 2-cent coin in 1864. And then basically, Eisenhower turned it into a law later on. It says the following year, 1956, President Eisenhower signed a law making In God We Trust the national model. Why did he do that? I believe he did that because he understood that we all want to be a part of something greater than ourselves. And even during a time of war, there needs to be a belief in something greater than ourselves. The Ten Commandments provide a framework for moral and ethical behavior, addressing fundamental issues of worship, family, human life, and community relationships. They establish clear guidelines on how we should relate to each other and God and how we should relate to each other, promoting justice, integrity, and love. There are the Ten Commandments right there. You can see them. And what's interesting about the Ten Commandments is that if you look at our laws today, 4 of them deal with God and 6 of them deal with man. Loving God and loving others, that is the golden rule. And that's what needs to be taught in all schools, not just in private schools, because God loves all children, not just some. Verses on the Washington Monument. If you were to go there, you see holiness to the Lord on the Washington Monument, Exodus 28:26. You'll see search the scriptures on the monument, carved into the monument. You'll see may heaven to his union continue to manifest. And God we trust is carved into the monument. And on the capstone, the top of the capstone of the capsule of the monument, it says, "Praise be to God." Praise be to God. The Jefferson Memorial. Of the 5 areas inside the Jefferson Memorial in which Jefferson's words have been carved, 4 of them are God-centered. And Jefferson says this, "God who gave us life and gave us liberty." Let me repeat that. "God who gave us life and gave us liberty, can the liberties of this nation be secure when we have removed the conviction that these liberties are a gift of God? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever." One of my favorite places to go growing up in Washington was to the Lincoln Memorial. I was there when a 10-year-old when a guy by the name of Martin Luther King came there. It's an amazing place to go. Rallies, a lot of things have happened there. The Lincoln Memorial contains numerous acknowledgments of God's citation of the Bible, including verses declaring that we here highly resolve that this nation under God, under who? Under God, shall not perish from this earth. And it goes on and on and on. I'm going to finish my presentation because I want to get to the lawyer from PJI. I don't want to hold him up too long. I'm just going to give you some quotes that I think are interesting regarding the Ten Commandments. Cecil B. DeMille, you guys know him. He was the one who did the movie, The Ten Commandments. He says this, "The Ten Commandments are not laws, they are the law. Man has made over 32 million laws since the commandments were handed down to Moses on that mount more than 3,000 years ago. But he has never improved on God's law. The Ten Commandments are principles by which man may live with God and with man. They are the expression of the mind of God for his creation. They are the charter and guide of his human liberty, for there can be no liberty without the law." Winston Churchill once said this, "You can have 10,000 regulations and still have no respect for the law. We might start with the 10 Commandments. If we live by the golden rule, there would be no need for any other laws." In 1974, In 1974, Governor of California, Ronald Reagan, stated, if a bureaucrat had been writing the 10 Commandments on a single rock slab, would not be enough room. The simple rules would have read this way: thou shalt not, unless you feel strongly to the contrary, or of the following stated exception, see paragraph 1 through 10, section A4. Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of England, said this. She said, the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, are addressed to each and every person in the origin of our common humanity and the sanctity of our individual life. Each one has a duty to try to carry out these commandments. If you accept freedom, you cannot have principles without responsibility. You can't do this without the biblical foundation. Notice what she says. Your founding fathers came over here with that, and the doctrine of the New Testament and the Old Testament. They looked after one another, not only as a matter of necessity, but as a matter of duty to their God. There is no other country in the world which started this way. And as I finish up, John Adams wrote to Thomas Jefferson on November 4th, 1816, the 10 Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount contain my religion. And in dissenting, the Supreme Court refusal to hear echoed in Indiana, the 10 Commandment case in 2001, Chief Justice Rehnquist wrote, the text of the 10 Commandments no doubt have played a role in the secular development of our society and can no doubt be prevented by the government as playing a sole role in our civic order. A carving of Moses holding the 10 Commandments surrounded by the representation of historical figures adorned the frieze on the south wall of this courtroom. And we said that the carving signals respect not only the great postulizers, but the great lawgivers of the day. Franklin D. Roosevelt said this, we as a nation and individuals will please God best by showing regard to the laws of God. There is nothing better than fostering goodwill towards man by first fostering goodwill towards God. If we love him, we will keep his commandments. And I have a few more to go before we close here. And referring to the 10th in our nation's laws was given to Moses on the Mount. I don't think we emphasize them enough, he says. If we don't have a proper foundation of our morals, if we don't have a proper foundational moral background, we will finally end up in a totalitarian government which does not believe in the rights of anybody except the state. I'm going to say this. The treaty of, I wanted to know where We Are Not a Christian Nation came from, and I found out where that came from. The Treaty of Tripoli was signed in 1776. The first treaty of the United States, now Libya and Tripoli, is aimed to secure commercial shipping rights and to protect American ships in the Mediterranean Sea. And basically what had happened, they made a deal with the pirates that they would assign this treaty and somehow they would make America look less Christian to the Muslims. And what happens is that Thomas Jefferson got wind of this and said, no, this is extortion. And the war started, they broke the treaty, and they made a new treaty, and they took the phrase out of it. The phrase simply says, America is not a Christian nation. They took that phrase out of it and had a new treaty drawn up. So the opponents of that we're not a Christian nation use this as proof that we're not a Christian nation, and we are. I want to close with one quote from George Washington, and this is what he says, first president of our nation. He said, we must not despair. Our situation has been compromising before, and it has changed for the better. So I trust it will again. If difficulties arise, we must put forth new exertions and proportions of our efforts to the exegesis of time. In other words, we need to work harder when the times are difficulty. I believe that the Ten Commandments can help everyone. I believe that they are the basics of our moral code in our Judeo system that has been long forgotten for a long, long time. Our federal government has not, and it was rightly said, you can find the commandments in more government buildings than you can do churches. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Frazier. We will now listen to Special Counsel from Pacific Justice Institute, Mr. Effer.
Yes, hello, my name is Michael Peffer, and a good evening to the board and the superintendent. I am a constitutional law attorney for Pacific Justice Institute, a nonprofit law firm, and I'm also an adjunct professor at Trinity Law School here in Southern California. Thank you for letting me address the issue of displaying 10 Commandments in schools. I also thank you for what we've seen is this is democracy. This is the way we do things. You all on the board are properly listening to both sides of your constituency and are making decisions based on that. So I'm really heartened to see what is happening here. So I want to say, allowing the 10 Commandments to be displayed in schools will enable students in this district to know the history and heritage of our legal system. Laws are the guardrails of society, and too often those laws in general, are ignored. Our young people need to know where they originated and the moral authority for the American system of justice. They need to know where we started, how the country has moved forward these last 250 or so years, and where we need to go as a nation. The purpose of this display, a display of the 10 Commandments, is the education of students, not to proselytize. Indeed, it will ensure that students in our public schools have an understanding and appreciation for the foundational documents of our state and national government. It's been discussed here about Thomas Jefferson's statement on the so-called wall of separation. But it's important to realize that that statement was made to a Baptist church who was concerned about infringement of liberty, religious liberty on the church, against the church. This wall was a wall to keep government from attacking churches. It was not to keep government insulated from any reference of religion. Indeed, that is not how history has been taken care of. The 10 Commandments were a prominent part of American public education for over 200 years. And at the founding of our nation, the study of Christianity and the Bible was an integral part of an education in the law. Many colleges and universities, including law schools, were started as Bible colleges. The evidence of the cohesiveness between the Bible, Christianity, and the law is simply irrefutable. For those who fear that this putting up of 10 Commandments in school classrooms might violate the Constitution, there is a case just 2 years ago called Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, and that was involving a coach praying on the sidelines or in the middle of the field. And it's important to realize, this was brought up earlier, the Lemon Test was overruled by this case, the Kennedy versus Bremerton. So the courts are no longer to consider the Lemon Test, and indeed, it was a test that was had a lot of problems with it, and it unnecessarily restricted religious displays and such from governmental properties, and that's why the court finally said goodbye to it. The court in Kennedy instead drafted a new rule, and that rule is that the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment must be interpreted by references to historical practices and understandings. Again, the Ten Commandments have been a part of education for almost all of our history. And this line that the courts utilize to draw between the permissible and the impermissible has to accord with our history and reflect our understanding of the Founding Fathers. There's no question that history is replete with examples of the use of Ten Commandments in schools. And as my predecessor pointed out, in many, many government offices, including the High Court and many courts of our land. So what does the First Amendment protect? What does the Establishment Clause affect? And that's what many were referring to, is the Establishment Clause, that Congress shall not make an action to establish religion. And what it says, according to this recent case of the Kennedy case, is that government may not, consistent with a historically sensitive understanding of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, make a religious observance compulsory. Government may not coerce anyone to attend church, nor may it force citizens to engage in a formal religious exercise. No doubt, too, coercion along these lines was among the foremost hallmarks of religious establishment the framers sought to prohibit when they adopted the First Amendment. That's from the Kennedy versus Bremerton case. So the idea that we must eradicate all references to religion in public life is an idea that was completely foreign to our founders and to most constitutional scholars. This move to have the Ten Commandments displayed in public schools is precisely on target with that which was set forth in the recent case of Kennedy versus Bremerton. And it historically, the Ten Commandments, and faithfully reflects our founding fathers' reliance on the Ten Commandments as the foundation of America's jurisprudence and our history and heritage. And this is essential for a proper understanding for our students, to know what is happening, what has happened before us, and how we can be stronger in a moral sense as a society. And I have no doubt that actions like this, displaying the Ten Commandments in a public school, would survive scrutiny by the U.S. Supreme Courts and the court under the Kennedy case. Again, I thank you so much for allowing me to speak, and I take that as a privilege and an honor as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.